Huge weekend, massive recruiting weekend going on right now, even as we speak on this Sunday night. I don't want to waste time here. I do want to tell you, though, make sure you're locked on to 247sports.com. Steve Wiltfong's phone. Oh, the iPhone. Can you imagine how hard that thing is gasping for breath right now? He's been updating and updating and updating all day, so there are articles and there's scoop everywhere. I have curated what you need to know from a national level. Georgia, and it's going to shock you, they got a really good class. They got the number one class in the country right now. I would call them the odds-on favorite to finish with the number one class. We'll see. It's a loaded in-state crop. Okay, so I could spend all day talking to you about the good players in the state of Georgia this year. But what's interesting, and if you look at the kids they had on campus this past weekend, and if you listen to Kirby Smart last time we had him on this show, he said, yeah, we want to lock down the state, but we have to be smart about the way we recruit. You can't just assume that the complementary nature of your needs will always be met with in-state guys. It could be that you got a number of defensive backs and a really, really deep offensive line crop, but maybe you need 3 interior defensive linemen, and the better quality is a kid in Indiana and a couple of them from Arizona and California. Well, what do? You recruit your backyard, but then you supplement nationally. That's what Georgia's doing again. That's always their MO, and it always will be under Kirby Smart. They flipped Chauncey Bowens. Not good news for our friends down in Gainesville, but it is good news for Georgia. That's a 4-star running back. Nate Frazier is another top 247 running back out of Santa Ana, California. And so 2 kids at the tailback position, not from the Peach State. They are either the just outright commit. Well, I don't want to say he signed with him because he didn't, but he committed to him, or they're the favorite. So 2 tailbacks there. And also they lead, and this is pretty interesting. I think a lot of folks in the recruiting industry are not surprised by this, but if I told you there's a 5-star edge guy out of Birmingham, Alabama, named Jordan Ross, you'd say, oh, where is he going, Bama or Auburn? Well, Georgia leads for him right now. At least that's the way things look. Vestavia Hills, no less. If management lived in Birmingham, Vestavia Hills is the neighborhood management would live in. I think I've told you all you need to know about Vestavia Hills. This is a loaded cycle in-state for Georgia, like I said, but they are making moves for a number of kids out of state. All right, let's move it along because we got so much to get to. Penn State, the Fighting Jessies. See that chart there on your screen? Number 6 in the country right now. Yes, Meemaw said only a foolish man buys stock in class rankings in June. But we are those foolish men sometimes, Meemaw. Good for Penn State. Now, so far, they got 18 verbal commits. Subject to change. But there are a ton of eyes on a kid named Nick Marsh, because the receiver position at Penn State, if you were to identify a big question, relatively speaking, the receiver position is one where they're not overly dynamic. They have not been overly dynamic, but that's why you recruit, because you got the dynamic quarterback up there. Hopefully, big-time names like this want to play with him. 6'3", 200 pounds. He's a 4-star receiver out of Michigan. It looks like Penn State leads for him. Jamonta Waller, 5-star edge guy. Now, this would not even be the first cycle in the last couple of years where they will have landed a 5-star edge guy if they do so secure this commitment. But they lead for him, I do believe, and our folks close to Penn State agree with that. Auburn, Florida, the main competition there. And Grimsley, 4-star safety. Jamere Grimsley out of Tampa. That's going to be a Penn State-Alabama battle, as it appears right now. Now, he hadn't taken his official to Alabama, but they feel really good about what they did with him on campus this weekend. Penn State it's so funny when you watch the trajectory. It's not a sudden spike. It's just steadily, little engine that could, further and further, chugga up the hill. And they're in it for 1 or 2 more high-caliber athletes per cycle that they used to not be in it for. And it's 1 chop, 2 chop, 3 chops. This tree's eventually going to fall. No, it's not. It would have fallen already. That's not how forestry works. Please be quiet, sir. It'll fall eventually. We'll see. This year, next year, it'll fall eventually. I was down in Miami for the better part of the week. And I tell you, I walked in that building Tuesday, and it was already buzzing about the official visit weekend that was coming up. We did the live show from there Thursday night. I told you, in no uncertain terms, they think this is the biggest official visit weekend in the history of Miami football. Well, here we are on Sunday night. I think they just had the biggest official visit weekend in the history of Miami football. I don't just want to gloss over what I said there. The history of Miami football they've had some pretty good teams down there. They've pumped out some pretty good players. The biggest and most star-studded, let me say, official visit weekend in the history of Miami Hurricane football. They had 4 of the top 10 there, 6 of the top 35. It sounds like they knocked it out of the park with all of them, and it would be a shock to me if anything other than that was said, given the level of preparation and the intense attention to detail. I mean, right down to how inflated the green and orange balloons were on the staircase leading into the athletic building. Every T was crossed, every I was dotted, and it's the kind of weekend that could reverberate for years to come. You think that's hyperbolic? It's not. Ask any of these fan bases around major programs where, there was a kind of a paradigm shift. They always point back to a recruiting class that was the spark. And some of them who follow recruiting hardcore can point back to individual weekends. I'll tell you this, I'll save a lot of this for later in the show. So after we got done with Mario Cristobal, I talked to him for another 30 or 40 minutes just off camera. Boy, if I could have had him mic'd up for that. But the one thing I'll tell you is he's got a really good memory. And he was detailing specific recruiting weekends that he remembered from his time at Alabama as an assistant or Oregon as a head coach. And talking about the level of detail, the intensity you have to have, but also the ability not to force the issue. And so you got to kind of balance your emotions. But, man, some of the stories about those recruiting classes at Bama and how they learn, how he learned attention to detail and leave no stone unturned and applied it at Oregon. And obviously they're applying it down there now. It wouldn't surprise me if they've had a verbal commit since we've gone on air. Watch that closely because I think they will get results out of this weekend, either immediately or eventually. Notre Dame had a smaller contingent, but a really important one this weekend. They're already near capacity on their class. When I say capacity, you can save it. You don't need to tell me that nothing matters until the ink is dry. I know. I'm also telling you, I remember Keon Keeley last year. I know they're not immune to decommitments. I'm telling you they have 19 verbals. I'm telling you I think most of them are going to stick. I'm telling you they got the number 3 class in the country right now, and they are training headlong into challenging to finish inside the top 10 again. Elijah Rushing, appropriately, the number 1 edge player in the country, was on campus this weekend. He is from Tucson, Arizona. Fascinates me that we don't pronounce that name Tucson. Just fascinates me. But nevertheless, 6'6", 235, need him. Need players like him. Difference maker. Also, the number 2 tight end, Carter Nelson, out of, I believe, Nebraska, was on campus this weekend, too. If I were to tell you, hey, Notre Dame had 2 high-profile players on campus, what positions do you think they played? Edge rusher and tight end would be way, way up there for me. That's a Nebraska-Georgia kind of Notre Dame battle right now for the tight end. That's why you brought Marcus Freeman in. Not Marcus Freeman. Marcus Freeman. That's why you elevated him. I remember when Brian Kelly was up there, they weren't bad recruiting. They weren't bad at anything, actually. They were never in the conversation like this. Now, that's not a knock on Kelly because he's got LSU in the conversation. As I've told you many times, I think this was a win-win. Both programs seem to be better off. Freeman at Notre Dame, Kelly at LSU, you know that whole deal. I've gone over that many times. But he's got him as a major player in recruiting right now. He's got him in conversations that they used to not be in. And so whatever changes they've made up there, whatever promises they've made him, and whatever attitude and approach he's brought to the recruiting trail, it's working. Marcus Freeman's way is working. And, of course, that has to translate on the field, and we can't press the fast forward button and find out what the future holds before we get there. Michigan and Ohio State both had notable weekends here. Look at the crystal ball feature and look at Michigan right now picking up crystal ball, and that's just the 24/7 Sports method of prediction for insiders. A couple of crystal balls logged for Dom Nichols. That's a 4-star edge guy out of Maryland. Elias Rudolph, that's a 4-star edge guy out of Florida. Michigan, always been a national recruiter. And also, one of the very special prediction alerts in the business is the Fong ball, as I call it. And that is when Steve Wiltfong weighs in. Has he trademarked Fong ball? I know he's trademarked a few similar terms for different reasons, but has he trademarked Fong ball yet? I don't know. But I am if he's not. And I'm telling you, he dropped one for 5-star defensive end Eddrick Houston. And that's a 5-star defensive end out of Buford High School, home of the Wolves. Played them many times when I was at Harris County. They have athletes like that up there. And Ohio State's in it big for one. I always thought about Buford and Notre Dame because they have the same color uniforms, as you can clearly see if you're watching the B-roll right now. Recruiting is on fire, okay? This is like tip of the iceberg stuff. You got to be locked in on this. I don't want you guys to be surprised. I don't want you guys to be taken off guard. I would not be fulfilling my duty to you as the leader of Pate State University and a premium college football podcast, even though it's free, if I didn't keep you up to date on this stuff. I don't call this a recruiting show, but man, how do we not talk about this? This is what January used to be. June and July are what January used to be.